I wanted to thank my biggest supporter, the person who had been my right hand through every challenge, the person whose belief in me had never once wavered, the person without whom none of this would have been possible.
Kayla Mitchell.
Derek, I built this company and I know what you've been doing all this time.
Baby, I didn't know you are the CEO. I'm sorry.
Some people spend their entire lives building something extraordinary, quietly, without applause, without credit, without a single person in their immediate world stopping long enough to ask how any of it got done. They show up every day, and they pour everything they have into the work and into the people around them, and they do it without demanding recognition, because somewhere along the way, they made peace with the fact that the ones closest to them would probably never fully see it. And most of the time, those people are right. Most of the time, the work stays invisible. Most of the time, the silence holds. But every once in a very long while, something happens. Something outside of anyone's control. Something that was never planned and never designed to be a moment of reckoning, but becomes one anyway. Simply because the truth has been compressed for so long that when it finally surfaces, it does not trickle out. It detonates. And on a Thursday evening in downtown Atlanta, in a glass-walled ballroom in front of 400 people, it detonated for a woman named Victoria in a way that nobody in that room, including Victoria herself, had seen coming. What happened that night took less than 60 seconds to unfold. It took 9 years to become possible. And it is the kind of story that once you hear it, you will find yourself thinking about it at 3 in the morning, not because it is dramatic, but because somewhere in it is a truth about your own life that you have not yet found the words for. Before we go any further, we want to hear from you right now. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from. We love hearing from this community more than we can say, and if you are new here, please hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos, because we have stories coming that will leave you completely speechless. Derek Harmon was 38 years old the night of the gala. He had spent the better part of his adult professional life in marketing and business development, moving through firms in the Southeast with the particular momentum of a man who is very good at the visible parts of any job, and considerably less interested in the invisible ones. He was the kind of professional who could walk into a room full of skeptical clients and walk out with a signed contract. And not necessarily because the proposal was the strongest one on the table, but because Derek himself was impossible to dismiss in person. He had presence, he had timing, he had a voice that landed with just enough warmth and just enough authority that people tended to stop what they were doing and listen, which in the world of sales and client management is a skill worth more than most formal qualifications. His career had moved upward in the way that careers built on personality tend to move, not in a straight line, not through the patient accumulation of technical mastery, but in jumps. Opportunistic, well-timed jumps from one platform to the next, each one slightly higher than the last, each one made possible by the impression he left rather than the record he had built. He was not a fraud in any simple sense. He did the work. He showed up. And he hit enough of his numbers often enough that the argument for keeping him was always stronger than the argument for questioning him. But the people who worked most closely with Derek over the years, the ones who sat beside him in the meetings he presented and knew what had gone into building the material he was presenting, those people had a more complicated view of his success. They knew which client wins had been handed to him by a warm introduction from someone above him. And they knew which pitches had been written largely by junior staff, whose names appeared nowhere near the final document. They knew the specific pattern of Derek Harmon taking credit smoothly, naturally, without apparent guilt, the way a person does when they have been doing it so long that it no longer registers as a choice. He was the face of outcomes that other people had sweated over, and he wore that face very well. Victoria Caldwell Harmon was 36 at the time of the gala. She had built Caldwell Meridian Group, a consulting and business development firm operating across 6 states, from a founding idea and a capital investment that most people in her circle had quietly considered a long shot. She started it at 30, which is young to start anything serious. And she built it without a co-founder, without a high-profile investor backing her publicly. Yeah, and without the kind of professional network that most people consider the prerequisite for that level of entrepreneurial ambition. What she had instead was something harder to quantify and far more durable. She had an extraordinarily clear mind, a near-total absence of ego in her decision-making, and a patience that bordered on the preternatural. She did not need to be seen making the right call. She just needed to make it. And over 6 years of building Caldwell Meridian from a 2-person operation into a 231-person firm with a regional footprint and a client list that most competitors twice her size would have been proud of, she made more right calls than wrong ones by a margin that was eventually impossible to argue with. She operated under the professional name Victoria Caldwell, separated from her married name in all company documentation, all legal filings, all public-facing communications. Her role as CEO was known to her board, her legal team, her senior leadership, and a small number of trusted long-term employees. To the wider market, Caldwell Meridian was a well-run firm with a private ownership structure and a notably thoughtful culture. To the people who came to dinner at the Harmon household on Saturday evenings, Victoria was Derek's wife. Those two realities had never once, in the years of their marriage, been allowed to occupy the same room. Until the night they did. They had met at a rooftop gathering in Atlanta 9 years before the gala. Derek had just taken a regional director role at a boutique agency. Victoria had just closed the first significant financing round for what would become Caldwell Meridian. Neither of them led with their work that night, which was unusual for Derek and entirely standard for Victoria. They talked for nearly 3 hours. About the city, it's about a documentary they had both watched independently the previous week, about the specific pleasure of being in a crowd and somehow still finding a quiet corner of it. There was something between them that night that both of them recognized, and neither of them immediately knew what to do with. Derek was drawn to her precision, the way she spoke in complete thoughts, the way she listened without performing her listening. Victoria was drawn to his energy, the ease of him, the warmth, and the way he could make a stranger feel like an old friend within a single conversation. They were attracted to what each other had that they themselves did not, which is often how it starts. They were married 18 months later. 31 guests. A mountain venue in North Georgia on a Saturday in October. Victoria had organized nearly all of it while simultaneously managing a critical operational expansion at the company. And Derek gave a toast that made 4 people cry and was still being talked about 6 months later by the people who heard it. The early years of the marriage were not unhappy. That matters to say clearly because it is tempting to look back at a story like this and make the beginning into a warning that nobody heeded. But the beginning was real. Victoria believed in Derek. She found his confidence genuinely appealing at a time in her life when her own world was structured almost entirely around careful, measured private effort. He was the opposite of that, and for a while, the opposite was exactly what she wanted beside her. She began helping him in the way that people who love someone and have more resources than them almost always begin. Quietly, without announcement, in small ways that felt like love rather than strategy. A contact here. And a word in the right direction there. When Derek was navigating a difficult negotiation at his firm, Victoria offered a perspective one evening over dinner that he took into the meeting the next morning and presented as his own thinking. When one of his client relationships was deteriorating, a mutual contact of Victoria's, someone with no visible connection to Derek's professional world, happened to have a conversation that shifted the client's perspective in Derek's favor. Now, Victoria never mentioned these interventions. She did not think of them as interventions. She thought of them as love expressed in the language she was most fluent in, which was the language of making things work. And then, 3.5 years into the marriage, she made the decision that would change the entire trajectory of everything that followed. She brought Derek into her company, not openly, not as her husband, through a third-party recruiter, Through a carefully structured process that left no visible fingerprints, she arranged for Derek Harmon to be recruited into a marketing director role at Caldwell Meridian Group. The recruiter was professional and thorough. The interview process was real. Derek negotiated his salary and accepted the offer with the genuine satisfaction of a man who believed he had earned the opportunity on merit. He told Victoria over dinner the night he signed. He was more animated than he had been in months. And it was, she would later describe it, one of the last genuinely good evenings of their marriage. Because he was looking at her the way he used to, like her presence at the table actually mattered to him. She smiled and said she was proud of him. And she was. And she was also, somewhere underneath the smile, conducting the private experiment she had decided she needed to run. She wanted to see who Derek was when she was not in the room, when the dinner table audience was gone, and there was only the work and the choices a person makes when they believe nobody who loves them is watching. What she found over the following 2 years was not the answer she had been hoping for. At Caldwell Meridian, Derek performed exactly as he had performed everywhere else. He was excellent at the front-facing work, the pitches, the presentations, the client dinners, the internal communications that build a professional reputation in an organization. He was considerably less present in the behind-the-scenes work that actually produced the outcomes he was taking credit for. The pattern that his former colleagues would have recognized immediately was visible to anyone who looked closely enough, which meant it was visible to Victoria, who looked at everything closely. His numbers were good. His reviews were strong. That he was being discussed for advancement within 18 months of joining, which happened partly because of his genuine interpersonal effectiveness, and partly because 2 of the accounts he was being credited with winning had been warm introduced through Victoria's network, funneled to him through channels that left his name at the front of the outcome and her name nowhere near it. Victoria watched all of this from her executive suite on the floor above his. Thus she read every performance review he received. She sat in board discussions about departmental advancement that Derek had no idea were happening. She approved every raise he received. She was, in the most literal possible sense, the silent engine behind every professional win he celebrated. And as the months passed and the wins accumulated and Derek's confidence expanded with each one, something in the marriage shifted in a direction that Victoria had been quietly dreading. And because the more Derek succeeded, the less he seemed to see her. Not in a dramatic way. In the way that a person stops noticing the furniture in a room they have lived in too long. She became part of the background of his life, familiar, assumed, not worth the particular attention he reserved for things he still found interesting. He began talking over her at dinner parties, not aggressively, with the casual ease of someone who had simply decided, without ever formally deciding it, or that his thoughts were the ones worth finishing. He made jokes at her expense in social settings, small ones, the kind that come wrapped in a smile and dissolve the moment anyone tries to examine them directly. He introduced her at events as his wife, with a flatness that carried no warmth in it, no pride, no sense that the person standing beside him was someone he had specifically chosen and was still glad he had. She was a category rather than a person, a role rather than a name. And Victoria, who had built a company from nothing and ran it with a precision and a care that hundreds of people depended on every single day, absorbed all of it with the same composure she brought to everything. She did not argue. She did not confront. She watched. She noted. She held it. And she waited, with the patience that had always been her most extraordinary quality, for the moment when she would know what to do with what she had seen. And then there was Kayla Mitchell, 29 years old. As a junior account manager at Caldwell Meridian who had joined the company about a year after Derek. She was genuinely talented, sharp, well-organized, good with clients in a way that was real rather than performed. She was also unmistakably drawn to Derek's orbit. To the access he seemed to have, to the ease with which he moved through the company as though the ceiling had been raised specifically for him, to the confidence he projected that made proximity to him feel like proximity to something moving upward. Derek noticed her the way that men who have stopped seeing their wives always notice someone who is still looking at them with fresh attention. The relationship did not begin overnight. It began the way these things always begin, in the margins of professional necessity, in conversations that ran slightly longer than the work required, and in a gradual and mutually understood crossing of a line that neither of them ever formally acknowledged was there. By the time their involvement was legible to anyone paying close attention, it had been developing for the better part of a year, and the only person at Caldwell Meridian with both the access and the clarity to see it for exactly what it was had seen it for months. Victoria knew. She had known long before anyone else in the building had even begun to form a suspicion. She said nothing. She did not change her behavior toward Derek at home in any way that he noticed. She did not alter her professional conduct toward either of them at the company. She simply continued doing what she always did, running the business, reading the reports, making the decisions, while carrying the knowledge of her husband's affair the way she carried everything difficult, which was internally and completely and without visible weight. 6 months before the night of the gala, Derek submitted a formal internal recommendation for Kayla Mitchell to be promoted to Senior Account Director. The role carried a salary increase of nearly $40,000, a new title, a seat at senior planning meetings, and direct access to executive leadership. The recommendation letter Derek wrote was detailed and confident, and notably thin on the specific performance metrics that a promotion of that level would normally require. HR reviewed it, and a flag was raised internally about a potential conflict of interest, based on what several people in the building had begun to quietly observe about Derek and Kayla's relationship, though nothing had been formally documented at that stage. The recommendation moved up the authorization chain, and at the top of that chain, as every significant decision at Caldwell Meridian eventually did, it arrived on Victoria's desk. She read it in full. She set it down. She picked up her pen and she signed the approval without a note, without a condition, without a single word of commentary attached. Kayla Mitchell got the promotion. She got the office. She got the title. And Derek, who received the news of the approved recommendation with a satisfaction that he made no particular effort to conceal from the colleagues around him, got bolder. Because that is what happens when a person gets away with something. They do not become more careful, lest they become more careless. They begin to mistake the absence of consequence for evidence that there are no consequences to be had. Derek brought Kayla to company events under the cover of professional inclusion. He sat beside her at dinners that Victoria was also attending. He mentioned her name in front of Victoria with a casualness that had moved so far past discretion that it had become something closer to provocation. He sat a company-adjacent charity gala, an event that Victoria's own foundation had co-funded. Derek told a group of colleagues with a light laugh that his wife did not really understand the business world. Victoria was standing close enough to hear it. She reached for a canapé from a passing tray, smiled at the person beside her, and moved the conversation in an entirely different direction. Her composure was, by that point, so complete that the people who observed it most closely had stopped being able to tell where the discipline ended and the indifference began. The answer was that neither had ended. Both were fully present, simultaneously. Because Victoria was not indifferent to what was happening. She was past it. There is a difference, and it is significant. Indifference is passive. It is the absence of feeling. What Victoria had arrived at was something active. She had made a decision about her marriage, about Derek, about the full arc of everything she had built and everything she had absorbed, and the decision was final, and it was hers, and she had made it entirely on her own terms. All that remained was the moment. And the moment, as it turned out, was coming faster than anyone in that story had calculated. The annual Leadership Gala was the most prominent event on Caldwell Meridian's calendar. Held every spring, it gathered top clients, key stakeholders, board members, and the company's highest-performing employees in a glass-walled event space in downtown Atlanta. 400 guests that year, full catering, a live band for the cocktail hour, a formal dinner and awards segment through the evening. And that particular year, the gala coincided, entirely by the logic of the company's communications calendar rather than any human design. With the launch of Caldwell Meridian's most significant rebranding initiative to date, the company was entering a new phase of public visibility, preparing for regional expansion and a fresh investment round. As part of that campaign, the communications team had planned a large outdoor billboard installation in the heart of downtown that would go live the evening of the gala. The billboard was a brand statement, a public declaration of leadership. Victoria Caldwell's name and photograph made visible to the city for the first time in a major format. It had been on the schedule since the previous autumn. The timing with the gala was a logistical convenience that the communications team had noted positively in their planning meetings. Nobody in those meetings had any reason to think about Derek Harmon. Nobody in those meetings knew that the CEO's husband worked on the third floor. Derek had been nominated for Employee of the Year. The nomination required, as all significant awards at the company did, CEO authorization. Victoria had signed the form. Quietly, without delay, without comment. His name was printed in the program, third from the end of the awards segment, listed for the highest individual honor the company gave out annually. He arrived at the gala with the posture of a man who expected to win. He was dressed impeccably. He worked the cocktail hour with the practiced ease of someone who has always been most comfortable in a room where he is being watched. Kayla was seated near the front of the room, close to the stage, at Derek's informal arrangement made under the framing of client management. Victoria arrived in a midnight blue dress and was seated at table 7. Not the head table, not the executive row. The middle of the room, where the sightlines to the podium were clear but not prominent. She had taken a separate car. She arrived without ceremony. She was, to most of the 400 people in that room, simply the wife of one of the nominees. She accepted a glass of wine from a passing server, found her seat, and settled in with the unhurried composure of a woman who had already decided everything about the evening before it began. The cocktail hour ended. Dinner was served. The band shifted to background ambiance. The program began. Awards moved through the evening with the measured pacing of a well-run event. And then the MC called Derek Harmon's name for Employee of the Year, and the room applauded. And he walked to that podium the way he had always walked into every room, like it had been constructed for his arrival. His speech lasted 4 minutes and 32 seconds. He spoke about vision, about commitment, about the importance of believing in yourself when the results are slow to come. He thanked colleagues by name. He made a joke that landed well and drew genuine laughter from the tables closest to the stage. He spoke about surrounding yourself with people who believe in the work. And then he looked toward the front of the room, toward Kayla, and he said, clearly, warmly, with full sincerity, that he wanted to thank his biggest supporter. The person who had been his right hand through every challenge. The person whose belief in him had never once wavered. The person without whom none of this, he said, would have been possible. He lifted his award. The room applauded. And outside, 40 feet above the street, the billboard went live. It started at the edges of the room. Someone near the window stood slightly. Then another. A low murmur moved through the tables closest to the glass. Phones appeared. Heads began turning toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the street. Derek was still at the podium with his award, watching the audience shift with the mild confusion of a man who does not yet understand that the attention has moved. He followed the direction of 400 faces turning toward the windows, and he looked up. Victoria Caldwell, a chief executive officer, Caldwell Meridian Group, her photograph beside the name. The same composed, direct expression she had been wearing all evening, 40 feet tall, lit up against the Atlanta skyline like a declaration that had been waiting years to be made. Derek stood at that podium for what people in the room would later describe in ranges of 3 to 7 seconds, though every person who was there agrees that it felt considerably longer than either number, and the specific blankness of a man whose internal systems have simultaneously stopped responding. His neck moved first. His eyes dropped from the billboard to the room, And then, with the slow and inevitable momentum of a man whose understanding of his own life is restructuring itself in real time, he stepped off the podium and walked toward table 7. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The band had stopped. The MC had stopped. The only sound was the ambient noise of the city outside and 400 people holding their breath in unison. He reached her table. Victoria was already standing. Not quickly, not dramatically. With the same unhurried precision she brought to every significant moment of her professional life. She rose from her chair, smoothed the front of her dress, and looked at her husband. He said her name. He started a sentence that he did not finish because the look on her face, not angry, not wounded, something that was closer to the expression of a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just set it down, stopped him before he reached the second word. She said, "I built this, Derek. All of it. And I have been watching you for a very long time. And I am done." She picked up her clutch. She walked out. Through the center of the room, not the edges, past the tables and the faces and the untouched champagne. I passed the podium where his award was still sitting. Through the main doors and into the elevator and out of the building and into a car that was already waiting, because of course it was. She had thought of everything. She always had. The doors closed behind her. And Derek Harmon stood alone in the middle of a room his wife owned, holding an award his wife had authorized, inside a company his wife had built from nothing, while 400 people processed in real time what they had just witnessed. And the silence that followed her exit was the loudest thing any of them had ever heard in a professional setting. Within the hour, the story was moving. Someone in the room had taken a photograph. Not of the billboard, not of Derek at the podium, but of Victoria's face in the moments just before she stood up. Her expression in that photograph is the thing that made the image travel. It is not rage. It is not grief. It is the face of a woman who has already finished the thing most people have not yet started. That image reached social media before the gala had ended. By midnight, it had tens of thousands of engagements. By the following morning, it was in hundreds of thousands of timelines. By the end of that week, it had been shared in every format the internet offers and had accumulated a volume of commentary that would have been extraordinary for a story involving public figures with existing audiences, let alone two people who were essentially private citizens. The caption that circulated most widely across every platform was some version of the same 4 words. She knew the whole time. Derek tried to call Victoria that night. Multiple times. She did not answer. He drove home. Her car was in the driveway. He rang the doorbell of his own house and nobody came to the door. He sat in his car in the driveway for an extended period that his neighbors clocked at somewhere between 45 minutes and 2 hours before he drove away. The following morning, a letter arrived from a law firm. Divorce proceedings initiated by Victoria Caldwell Harmon, effective immediately. The paperwork was already complete. It had clearly been prepared in advance of that evening, which told anyone who read it carefully that Victoria had not made her decision in a moment of public emotion. She had made it long before the billboard, long before the gala. The gala had simply been the frame she had chosen for the ending. Everything else had already been decided. Inside Caldwell Meridian Group in the days that followed, the reaction among staff moved in 2 distinct directions. The first was toward Victoria, and it was not shock. Among the 231 employees of the company, the response to learning that their CEO had been Victoria Caldwell Harmon was something most of them described afterward as recognition rather than surprise. They had felt the quality of her leadership in the culture of the company even when they could not see its source. In the way decisions were made. In the specific care with which the organization responded to conflict, to failure, to the things that reveal a company's true character when the external performance falls away. Several long-tenured employees said that the revelation felt like finally having a name for something they had already understood. A senior project manager who had been with the company for 4 years put it this way in a conversation that was later passed around internally. There had always been a level of care in the decisions that did not match the faces they could see making them. And now they knew whose care it was. That sentence traveled because it was exactly right. The second direction was toward Derek, and here, the reaction inside the company was considerably less generous, because most of the people in that building had encountered Derek professionally at some point, had sat in meetings with him, had watched him present work that bore his name and not the names of the people who had produced it, and had noticed the specific texture of his confidence, real enough in interpersonal settings, considerably thinner when examined against the actual record. Several employees, particularly women who had been in the company longer than Derek, described their reaction to the full picture not as surprise, but as the specific exhaustion of having their existing read of a situation confirmed in a way that was simultaneously vindicating and deeply frustrating. HR moved quickly. Kayla Mitchell was called in for a formal meeting within the first week. Her promotion was placed under review pending a conflict of interest investigation. That investigation moved with the efficiency of a process that had, it turned out, already been partially prepared. Because Victoria had filed an internal report 4 months before the night of the gala through a senior-level anonymous filing mechanism, formally flagging the conflict of interest in the promotion authorization. The report was dated, time-stamped, filed correctly, and had been sitting in the company's secure documentation system ever since. She had not acted on it. She had not escalated it. She had created a precise and unambiguous paper trail, and she had waited. When the legal and HR proceedings that followed the gala made that report discoverable, the picture it created was clear to everyone who saw it. Victoria had known about the conflict of interest in the promotion for months before she signed it. She had documented it formally and through proper channels. She had given the process every opportunity to surface and resolve itself, and when it did not, she had done nothing further, because she had already decided that the resolution would not come from inside a conference room. Kayla Mitchell's role was restructured. She remained at the company in a reduced capacity for several more months before accepting a position elsewhere. Her relationship with Derek, which had been conducted in the reflected light of his professional standing and the access he appeared to have, did not survive the removal of either. When the scaffolding came down, there was not much underneath it to sustain the weight of what they had been to each other. They were seen together a small number of times in the weeks after the gala and then not at all. Derek hired a crisis communications firm, which advised him to speak publicly and get ahead of the story. He gave an interview to a business-focused podcast. The interview was not received well. The combination of deflection and self-pity that it projected struck most listeners as entirely the wrong register for the moment, and the episode was eventually archived rather than promoted. The communications firm ended the engagement shortly after. Derek was transitioned out of Caldwell Meridian Group 60 days after the gala. The severance was generous. The non-disclosure agreement was comprehensive, and his departure was described internally as a mutual decision reached through a professional process, which is the language organizations use when the reality is too layered for a single sentence to contain honestly. He relocated within the year to a city 2 states away, at a firm considerably smaller than Caldwell Meridian. His LinkedIn profile no longer references the company. The 6 years he spent there, the promotions, the client wins, the award, and the entire constructed narrative of a career on the rise have been removed from his public professional history and replaced with a vague reference to Southeast consulting experience. The story that had made him Employee of the Year had been quietly erased from every surface he controlled. The surfaces he did not control were considerably harder to clean, because the photograph was still traveling. The image of Victoria's face in that ballroom, composed, final, and already gone before she had physically left, had taken on a life entirely independent of the people it depicted. It reappeared regularly in online spaces where people talked about work and power and the specific cost of being underestimated by someone who should have known better. People who had never heard the full story responded to it immediately, viscerally, with a recognition that required no context. There was something in that image that communicated the whole thing wordlessly. Is something about what it costs to watch someone diminish you. and something about the very particular peace that becomes available to a person when they have finally decided to stop carrying what does not belong to them. The divorce proceedings lasted 8 months. They were conducted entirely through legal representation. The terms were sealed. People close to Victoria's legal team described the settlement as, in their words, more than fair from a financial standpoint, which most people interpreted to mean that Victoria had given Derek more than the situation strictly required. Whether that came from residual feeling or from the practical wisdom of a woman who understood that generosity in endings prevents the endings from becoming permanent entanglements, nobody who was present has said clearly. What is certain is that the proceedings concluded without public conflict, without dueling statements, and without the protracted media argument that cases with this level of visibility often produce. When it was done, it was finished. Completely and cleanly, the way Victoria had always preferred things. 6 months after the gala, Victoria Caldwell gave her first public keynote under her own name. The venue was a regional business conference in Atlanta. Several hundred attendees. She walked onto that stage without the infrastructure of concealment she had operated behind for years, and she gave a presentation about the company's expansion strategy and the philosophy of leadership she had developed over a decade of building something from nothing. The reception was a standing ovation from a room that included a significant number of people who had followed her story and a significant number who had known her professionally for years without knowing who she actually was. But both groups rose at the same time. After the keynote, a journalist who had been covering the business community for 15 years said that it was the most confident first public appearance she had ever witnessed from someone who had spent years deliberately avoiding the stage. Victoria, in the brief exchange after the event, said only that she had never avoided the stage. She had just been busy building it. Her name is on the building now. A small brass plate beside the main entrance. Hari installed the spring after the gala as part of the rebranding. Most people who pass it every day do not know the full story behind it. Some do. The ones who do tend to pause for a moment longer than the others, because there is something in a name on a building that lands differently when you know what it took. When you know the years of silence behind it. When you know that the woman whose name is on that plate spent years watching someone she loved take credit for what she had built and chose. Deliberately and on her own terms, the moment and the method of her truth. And now we arrive at the part of this story that most tellings stop short of. Because it is easy to end here, with Victoria standing in the light and Derek somewhere in the distance, and the moral of the story sitting cleanly within reach. But the full version of this story has one more layer, and it belongs here, at the end, because it is the layer that makes everything else mean more than it already does. And in the months after the gala, as the story circulated and evolved and accumulated commentary from millions of people who had never met either of its principals, a private letter emerged. Victoria had written it, not for publication, not for the record, but for herself, in the weeks immediately following her departure from that ballroom. A close friend, with Victoria's quiet and somewhat reluctant permission, eventually shared selected passages. And what those passages revealed was not the narrative of a woman who had won. It was the narrative of a woman who had lost something, and who had known for a long time that it was gone. She wrote that the Billboard had not been her moment of triumph. She wrote that it had been, instead, and the moment she finally allowed herself to fully accept that what she had been hoping for, some version of Derek who would eventually look up from the performance of his own success and actually see her, was not coming. That it had not been coming for years. That she had approved every promotion and signed every raise and watched every performance review with something she now recognized as hope that had stopped having a real basis in evidence long before she had been willing to name it as such. She had kept building the support structure for his career, not because she was playing a long strategic game, but because she had not yet fully accepted that the person she was building it for had become someone she did not recognize. And because stopping would have required admitting that the investment had been wrong, that the love had been real, but the judgment had been flawed, that she had overridden her own instincts for years in the service of a version of Derek that existed primarily in the story she had told herself about who he could become. The letter did not read like a victory. It read like a reckoning. With the marriage, yes, but also with herself. With the years she had given to the architecture of someone else's advancement while conducting her own life at the margin of his. With the specific trap of being the strongest person in a room and using that strength to build the stage for someone less capable of holding what you have placed on it. With the cost of silence maintained so long and so completely that by the time you decide to speak, the speaking itself is less about communication and more about conclusion. She was not celebrating. She was closing something, with both hands and with full presence, and with the grief that belongs to the end of something you once believed in entirely. That grief does not diminish what she built. It does not complicate the clarity of what Derek did, or the dignity of how she chose to respond to it. But it makes the story true in a way that the cleaner version of it is not. Because the cleaner version asks you to believe that Victoria was always 3 steps ahead, always in control, always moving toward a planned destination. And the truth is that she was a person who loved someone and helped them and watched that someone used the help as evidence that they deserved more than they had earned, and watched them eventually stop seeing her altogether, and held all of that privately for years because she had not yet found the language or the moment for the alternative. The Billboard gave her the moment. Everything she had built gave her the language. And the fact that she walked out of that room with her head level and her hands steady and her face carrying that expression that nobody in 400 people could fully decode, that was not a strategy. That was who she had always been. Even before any of this, even before Derek, even before the company, she had always been that person. He just forgot to notice. Victoria Caldwell still runs Caldwell Meridian Group. The company has grown every year since the rebranding. Her name is on the building. Her photograph is in the lobby. She is, by every measure available, exactly where she always was, at the center of something she built from nothing, running it with the precision and care and deliberate commitment that has defined her from the beginning. She has never spoken publicly about Derek, about the marriage, about the night of the gala, about any of it. She does not need to. The building speaks. The company speaks. The brass plate by the door speaks. And somewhere in the comment sections of the video that photograph eventually reached, in the threads that ran for thousands of responses across every platform it touched, the people who saw her face and recognized something in it speak too. They have been speaking since the night the Billboard went live. And they have not stopped. Derek Harmon is somewhere in the Southeast, at a smaller firm, living a smaller version of the life he used to present to the world. But whether he understands yet what he had and what he cost himself is not something anyone outside of him can know. Whether the loss of it has taught him something that the years of having it never did, that is also not something any of us can answer. What we can say is that the architecture he was living inside collapsed the moment the light came on, and the person who built that architecture walked away from it with everything that actually belonged to her, which, in the end, was everything that mattered. Here is the question I want to leave you with, and I want you to sit with it honestly before you answer it. Not the version of the question that is easy to answer, the real one. The real question is not whether Derek deserved what happened to him. Most people listening to this story will answer that question the same way without needing much time. The real question is this. In your own life, right now, today, who are you not seeing? Who in your immediate world is doing the work that makes your life function, carrying the weight that keeps your environment stable, building the floor you are standing on, and receiving none of the credit, none of the recognition, none of the acknowledgement that the work deserves? Because most of us, if we are being fully honest, have a Victoria somewhere in our lives. A person whose contribution is so consistent and so structurally embedded in our daily reality that we have stopped registering it as contribution at all. We have started registering it as simply the way things are. And the most dangerous thing about that kind of blindness is that it does not feel like blindness from the inside. It feels like normal. It feels like Tuesday. It feels like nothing at all, until the billboard goes up. Drop your answer in the comments right now. Boys, we want to know what this story made you think about, what it brought up for you, what version of it you have lived or witnessed or are living right now. This community is built on exactly these kinds of honest conversations, and every single comment is read and matters more than you know. If this story moved something in you, hit the like button because it helps more people find it who need to hear it. Subscribe if you are not already here, because the next story we are about to cover is one that begins where this one ends, with a secret that was hiding in plain sight for years, and it is going to stop you cold. We will see you there.